So let me tell you about the time that I went to hell. Not the red guy with the pointy tail and the pitchfork kind of hell. Something much worse. And something that I will forever be grateful for. To be honest with you, I wasn't really sure how well received videos like this would be, because floating is such a niche thing that I didn't know if there would be anyone out there that was interested, but it warms my heart. I see so many views, and a lot of people have subscribed, which is bizarre, but you start something, you have to finish it. So I'm happy to make these videos. I'll start posting them pretty regularly. And the book that I'd like to recommend for this episode is called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. This book kind of hit close to home. My day job, other than teaching psychology, I work at a shelter for homeless veterans. And so for years, I've looked into the eyes of some of our most vulnerable members of society, and I've done what I can to understand that. What the book really does a great job of doing is explaining our need for connection to one another, and the separation that seems to be growing more and more as technology continues to make it easier for us to connect. We're doing it in different ways. We're still connecting, but in just different ways that maybe our brains haven't evolved yet to process, and this growing division between us. Mr. Junger does a great job of explaining how that can affect war veterans, the homeless, people with mental health disorders. It's a fantastic book. This book is it's a must read. And with that, let's get on with the episode. Set and setting is just as important for floating as it is for meditation or any other consciousness altering activities. And the set was that of not having any expectations whatsoever. Set meaning mindset. I have no expectations going into this. Now, as a psychology professor, the concept of subconscious influence is something that I not only study and teach, but I hold near and dear to my understanding of the human mind and psyche. I am a student of Jungian psychology, and I believe very strongly, and I believe that evidence supports my belief that the subconscious is as much at play, if not more at play, than perhaps the conscious mind is. So it's important to understand just a very brief amount of backstory. In June of last year, my brother-in-law died of a fentanyl overdose. He struggled with substance abuse, and unfortunately he lost that fight. And ironically, 1 week after he passed, I had purchased him reservations to float for the first time. So that was hard. And Matt and I shared a lot of mutual interest in psychedelic spirituality, and he and I had begun to have pretty intense conversations about some experiences that he had and what he and I thought about that, and how to relate that to psychology and things like this. And not to be too personal, but if I do have any sort of inclination toward a spiritual guide, he would be it for me. And walking to a lecture the day of this float. It was the first day of spring, or at least the first day that felt like spring, so it was nice. And I just, I'm a practitioner of mindfulness, so I stopped to appreciate just how beautiful the sun felt on my face. It was just coming through the trees just the right way. And I said something out loud that was somewhat out of character for me. I'm not one to, I'm one to meditate. I'm one to, recite mantras, but pray is not a word I would use for anything that I do. But I did out loud, and I held a conversation that was rather personal, and I simply asked for his help. And if he is, if he's still out there in some sense of the word, then I would appreciate it if he could guide, sort of my internal development. It's a human trait to not want to let go. So, moving on, that I believe had a subconscious influence on the outcome of what happened. So the setting was my float room. It's a very calm atmosphere by design, and about a 10 or 15 minute clarifying meditation before going in to the session. The session lasted for 2 hours. At one point I lost all track of time. My alarm had actually gone off, but the experience was so intense I didn't hear it. And I went right through the alarm. So now let's get to my little travels through an inner hell. Oh boy. So I went to hell in the sense that my subjective experience was about as close to a personal hell as I would ever hope to encounter. And I will do my best to be as honest as I can, because I think that's important, but understand that there are some things I'll hold back because they're very personal. I felt myself falling into the dreamlike state, say 40 minutes in. Began to have visuals, light, fractal geometry, which was beautiful, very enticing, curious imagery. I was very excited to see fractals. I remember a point of interest, I don't want to say a light, but a point of interest that I had fixated, my consciousness had fixated on, and I wanted to get closer to it, and that became a very tunneling effect. It felt as if I were going through a tunnel, and I lost the sensation of the body, and felt so free, felt very free. I became aware of what, and in some ways this doesn't translate well with words, but I felt that I wasn't by myself. Now, again, I know that I'm sort of sounding a little woo-woo here. I concede completely that this is potentially just a dream, and that it's all projection of the mind, but does that take away from the experience? You can stand on a mountain watching a beautiful sunset and have a camera right next to you. The sensory organs are receiving the same light and imagery as the camera. The experience is internal. The experience is subjective. The experience of beholding the beauty. So I can see that this is all more than likely a dream, but that doesn't change the intensity of experiencing it. I became very aware that I was not alone in this place. not the same as maybe the physical presence of someone, but have you ever felt like you can feel somebody looking at you, and then you happen to look over and somebody was looking at you? Kind of like that, but constant. But interestingly, I guess similar to a dream state where you interact with dream characters, I didn't question it. I sort of just, yeah, there's something here. And I remember distinctly coming to a, boy, how do you explain? Being communicated with without being communicated with. I was made to understand. I know that might be anticlimactic, but that's the best way that I can articulate what this was like. A thought that did not belong to me was in my mind. I sound crazy. A thought that wasn't mine was presented to me. And the thought was crystal clear. There was no mistake. It was almost like, notice how I'm struggling for words right now to convey, and I hope that you are perceiving what I want to convey. It didn't matter because I understood clearly what I was being asked. And what I was being asked was, do you want to play a game? The game will be very difficult, and this will be not a pleasant experience, but the rewards will be great. The gifts will be great. I remember feeling a building anxiety, which is bizarre, but this was relatively intense in its, I was fully lucid in this dream state, and I breathed. I remember some part of me was still physically able to do this. I physically breathed through it, the anxiety that was building, because, like I said, this wasn't like your buddy saying, oh, this is a really scary movie, and it turns out it's not very scary. No, I believed this thought that what lay ahead was going to be extremely different. And it was. That's an understatement. So I agree. Twice I'll be asked that question, and both times I agreed to move on. What preceded that decision was a movie. My subconscious was like a movie projector. It was as if I picked up like an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive, but on a cosmic scale, and had virtual reality goggles on, because the imagery was as if I am right now, looking at this camera. As real as this desk is, everything was vividly real. I didn't seem to touch or interact with anything, but in that place and time, I would have no doubts that I could. Pause. And so the movie began to play right out in front of me, like that Christmas movie where the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future takes the guy through real life, but nobody seems to acknowledge that he is there. Just like that. I was just watching things play out, and this grogging recognition came over me that I was watching my life, but in unfamiliar memories, or I didn't recognize the events that were playing out. And I guess I realized this was either some sort of alternate timeline or the future, but not the distant future, because my daughter was still 4 and little, and my wife was still the same woman that I recognized. I mean, nothing seemed out of place, and I was watching. I watched myself, and this is the part where it gets personal, and I have to kind of like skim the surface, but I don't like myself very much in my past. I've had a lot to overcome and a lot to grow from, and to the point where I don't even identify with the person that I once was. I don't even have his memories anymore. I've worked so hard to become somebody else. And it started when I went into recovery for addiction. Been sober for 7 years, and discovered Buddhism and meditation and exploring consciousness for the purpose of healing and growth. Well, anyway, what I began to see was if I had returned to the person that I once was. When we think of something bad that we could do, I don't know about you, but I have a knee-jerk reaction to just think of something terrible. Stealing, hurting someone, cheating on someone, whatever, something bad. It's almost like we don't allow that thought all the way in. We just kind of instantly kick it out of our brain and go, oh, no, I would never do that, never do that. Oh, that would be terrible. But this game, there was no skimming the surface of your mistakes. It wanted me to see them, and it showed me a series of selfish decisions that I guess I took it for granted that I would never allow myself, I would never tolerate certain behavior from myself. But I guess subconsciously, perhaps I feared falling back into certain habits, certain patterns of thinking, and other manifestations of loneliness and self-hatred, misery, depression, etc. It showed me a series of decisions that I made that were very selfish and just foolish and impulsive and terrible decisions. And the consequences of those actions. It wanted me to see what would happen if I made those choices. I keep saying it, and I know that that's bizarre to say that, that I don't know what we're talking about here. Was it my subconscious constructing this dream environment for me to watch this horror film of terrible decisions, or what? But my rational mind, the psychology professor wants to say this dreamscape of subconscious constructions, but it didn't feel that way. So my heart and mind are at odds with each other. What else is new, right? But this isn't it. This isn't where things get bad. Where it gets bad was watching the consequences of those decisions. The people that I care about most, how much I hurt them. And feeling such terrible regret and guilt and remorse and shock that I could do this, that I could do these things, that I was still capable of hurting people. My daughter, either of them. I have a 13-year-old this year, God help me, and a 4-year-old. And them, I'd be capable of putting myself before them. I was in this movie, and seeing the destruction that I caused them was unbearable, to the point where it became regret, became the fabric of space and time. Imagine getting into a heated argument with someone, like a best friend, or your lover, whoever, someone you care about, course you would never do this. But I said, imagine. And you, in a moment of seeing red, you gave into some overwhelming primal emotion, some impulse, and you hit them. Or worse, you shot them. I mean, crimes of passion, right? That's what that means. Some people, they go past the point of having any sense of control over themselves. Imagine the regret the moment the bullet left the barrel. That level of regret amplified to the point where soul-shattering, terrible remorse became the blood flowing through my little femoral veins. I had become pain. I had become pain. And it wasn't over yet. It was at this point, that I was asked again, do you want to proceed? This will be extremely difficult, but the reward will be great. And at this point, I began to physically have deeper breaths, and my heart was just pounding. Out of my physical body, not in the dream, the physical body, which was long since asleep. So, mind controls the body. So intense that it was actually affecting my sleeping body. Pause. And once again, I agreed. I mean, I came this far, right? It seemed like there was no going back. You couldn't take back. I couldn't take back what I had done. So the only logical thing to do, I don't even know. I'm trying to apply logic to it now. I wasn't thinking logically then, but what I would like to think is that the only logical thought was to go forward. For whatever reason, I went forward. I had to know how this ended. And the way that it ended was, remember when I tell you how vivid and real this was looking my best friend, my partner, the mother of my child, the woman I love, was looking her in the eyes as she took her own life as a result of the pain that I had caused her. And that image is seared into my brain. It was a face that I could absolutely, it was hers. But I'd never seen her make that face before. And remember, in the beginning of the video, I listened to my wife get that phone call at 3 a.m. that her baby brother had overdosed on fentanyl. And I had never heard pain like I heard on that phone call. I never want to hear it again. I never want to hear someone's heart break like I heard hers. But in this experience, I saw it. I saw it in this facial expression that she made. And there was still one last thing in store. There was no living with having done that to someone. Taking someone's sense of security and anchor to this world and just ripping it up. There was no living with that. So the final scene in this terrible movie was not seeing myself take my own life, but doing it. And I did. And there was no feeling sorry for myself. There was a feeling of desperately hoping that that made up for the pain that I caused my family, my friends, people who come to rely on me. I wanted to suffer. And after I had this little sit down, not really a sit down, I'm just going to call it that, with this other that was with me. And the other wanted me to understand, and I say that because I did say that I fully concede that this is a dream state and it's all subconscious constructs. Totally. Doesn't change the way it felt. That my tour guide through this personal hell, needed me to understand, and in fact that's what it said, was not from a place of ego or building yourself up as this great thing. It needed me to understand how important I am to the people that trust me and that rely on me. My students, my family, my children, my wife, my dogs. It needed me to understand that hurting them is not an option. Not from selfishness, not from poor decision making, not from putting myself before any of those people. And the feeling of sheer gratitude and understanding that I felt coming out of that experience, tears streaming down my face, but not from what I had seen, from realizing how important serving them is to me. Now, I am the person I am because I live for those people. They're my purpose. I don't live for myself. I stopped that a long time ago, and I've never felt more fulfilled. And the coming out of the experience, I had a fleeting moment of familiarity with my tour guide. And the last time I'll say it, fully concede that this is a dream and subconscious projection. But in that moment, I recognized who was with me. And I believe very much that it was the very person that I asked to help me. I believe it was Matt. I asked him to help me grow and better serve my family. And goddamn did he deliver. Coming out of that experience, I understood, again, not from a place of ego, I understood how important it is that I dedicate myself to them, and how hurt they would be, and how it would be game over for me if I let them down. I came up from the float, still pretty out of it, and I went into my daughter's bedroom. She was fast asleep as I float at night after she's gone to bed. Nothing like a 4-year-old stomping around upstairs to mess your float up. And I went into her room, and we use a Himalayan salt lamp for her nightlight. It's perfect nightlight. And she just had that amber glow on her from the salt lamp, and I kissed her forehead, She sort of like snorted, tucked her in, went downstairs, I kissed my wife, and I sat down and wrote everything I just went through. And for as brutal as the experience was, and I have left out a lot of details, it was probably the most positive experience I've had. It was not a bad trip. It was a lesson, and it strengthened my resolve to serve the people I care about. I'm so grateful for the experience. So now I want to talk about how this might relate to you and integrating. I think the important things to get out of this were that I think that sometimes we get bogged down in our responsibilities, and anybody out there that's in a long-term relationship or that lives with their partner knows it could be exhausting at times, and you want to be selfish. Come on, parents out there. I mean, come on. It's just us here right now, parents. How good does it feel when they finally go to bed, especially when they're young, and it's like you become a person again at 9 o'clock at night because you're not running around making lunch. You're not running around, telling them to stop coloring on the walls with a Sharpie or whatever. You become alive again. So it can be exhausting. And I think that we tell ourselves we don't. Let me rephrase. I don't think we allow ourselves to fully consider the potential that we do have to act selfishly or to act destructively. We like to think, especially if you're, at all spiritual or into self-development, and that doesn't have to be, reading the Bhagavad Gita. That could be going to the gym 3 days a week. You're bettering yourself. Taking classes. You're bettering yourself. Anybody that's on a path to try to become some better vision of themselves, I think, we might be blinded by the ego, thinking that we're just not capable of bad behavior. But this experience, my subconscious showed me exactly what circumstances could knock me right off of that spiritual high horse, and traps to avoid. And it was sort of like, no, you need to look at this. You need to look at yourself, the ugly truth. Don't look away. Because if you do, you won't recognize it when it's happening right in front of you. That's truly the reflection I have coming out of this trip. So, in conclusion, if you're hearing these words, you stuck it all the way through to the end, and I mean it when I say that I'm really curious does this resonate with you? If so, how? How does this relate to you? Can you relate? Have you ever spent time meditating on fear or on shortcomings or on... I think it would be a really interesting bit of homework. I am a teacher. That the next time you float or meditate, same thing, but maybe it'd be a healthy experience for you to have an intention that you wish to have your dark self revealed. Show me, talking to yourself, talking to your subconscious. Set the intention of, I want to reveal, as Carl Jung calls it, the shadow. I want to know the shadow. I want to you don't know how hard it is not to quote that 46 and 2 by Tool. Pick through the shadow. And nope, I'm gonna do it because it's such a brilliant lyric. I mean, it's, in case you saw in the other videos, I have just so many Tool posters up. I'm a diehard Tool fan. That the lyric is that he says, clinging to my muscle memories. You know, he wants to know what habits he has, that he isn't even aware of habits. What subconscious patterns of thought and behavior do we fall into without even realizing that it's you know, this self-programming. It's an interesting intention to set, because I think most people go into a float or a meditation seeking peace and serenity, but the real pay dirt is through, at least now, speaking from this experience, it's a willingness to sort of get knee deep in the muck that may be just beneath the surface and clean it out a little bit, because it felt like a purging. No, see, that's the ego. It's done now, it's gone. You went through the experience, you'll never do these things. I can't say that. But this brought it to light, and it made me pay attention. Thank you for tuning in to Float Tales. I'll be posting them more regularly. I'm really touched by I have 74 subscribers. That's so cool. I'll post more. You know, it's probably better than me bombarding people on Facebook with float trips. I'll see you guys next time. Happy floating.